Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's show. We will start the show in just a moment, but at first, we didn't plan to talk about it with our guest today, but since it happened, I could just not talk about it. I'm of course talking about the tragic loss today of Michael Brooks from what his family says is a unexpected medical condition. He was such a big part of kind of the new evolving, kind of almost around the rise of the Bernie Sanders campaign and the invigoration of the new left. He was right there from the beginning with a YouTube channel that taught me so much. Was kind of an ever-present background noise in my life when I was doing things. I put on one of his videos. Always good for a good analysis of a Dave Rubin or Ben Shapiro video, or telling you something about a big global conflict that you don't know. And of course, his likable personality could be just as easily expressed with a professor or a comedian. So he was just an incredibly versatile, incredibly vivacious character on air. Obviously, I never met him, but I was a big watcher. If I was going on YouTube, I was probably watching a Michael Brooks video at some point on my time on YouTube. Is absolutely shocking and will be in just horrible time for everyone who knew him. And obviously, the condolences go to his family and friends. With that, let's welcome into today's show our guest, and we're going to be talking about a lot of interesting news items today. On the show, we're talking about Trump threatening to send federal law enforcement forces to more cities. Now, on top of Portland, and the Portland protests have been controversial with the police there not really taking a major role, but really the federal officials that Donald Trump has sent in taking center stage. We'll take a look at Trump and Republicans divided on key pieces of coronavirus relief in a new political report, and the kind of new push that we're seeing from Trump to maybe even just today take the virus a little bit more seriously than he has. Also, teachers are suing the Florida governor for an order to reopen schools in defiance of, quote, basic human needs for health and safety. That's what they're saying the governor has. And we'll talk a little bit about the elections, how Trump's doing, how Biden's doing on just about 100 days out from the campaign. We're pleased to have back to the show David Langan. David, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's always a pleasure, Spencer. Thanks.
All right, so we're, of course, starting with some of the big news that is really getting a lot of people talking. President Trump, he has, of course, with the thing going on in Portland, he has deployed federal law enforcement troops in what was, I think, an objectively scary scene, where you see a protester being kind of just seemingly standing there, being taken up off the street, no name given, just kind of very kind of dark, secret police-esque way. And now we see other videos emerging of a lot of violence going on in these protests. These protests, I think, were mostly dying down, and a big part of the fact that it was dying down is because the police were really kind of just letting it happen, and I think that was really what was going on. And I think the fact that there's contact between the police and contact between the protesters just leads to more videos like this and makes the situation more worse and drawn out for the cops. And I feel like they were starting to realize that, and then this happened here. So what do you make of these moves? And also the news today that Trump is planning to deploy federal law enforcement to Chicago and other major cities, all, of course, controlled by liberal Democrats.
Well, right. You just hit the political part right up front. They are controlled by liberal Democrats. But I think it's interesting that most of the unrest is taking place in cities run by liberal Democrats. So whether it's corollary or causal, who knows? You'll get arguments on both sides of that. But I believe that a lot of urban mayors have adopted a hands-off protesters policy, which just increases the amount of violence and the number of protests.
And I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say violence. To my knowledge, other than I think the CHOP area, which was obviously kind of ended very, very badly, with people just kind of getting out of control there. Like the protests that have been carrying on, at least in some major cities, and of course they have been dying down relatively. I mean, not really dying down, but they just have been kind of peaceful marches that are not nearly as threatening. I think that's because the cops were pulling back. I think. What do you make of that line of thinking?
I mean, clearly, what's been allowed to happen is a lot of illegal behavior that would never be allowed to happen in any other point in time. For some reason, the George Floyd death had just triggered a powder keg, and it's probably been in the making for a long time. Read a little bit about what Black Lives Matter had been doing. They've been seeding government and activists with all kinds of money and information, just ready for this kind of moment. I think the rubber band got wound a little too tight, though.
I think with coronavirus especially, but I think a big part, I think the big part of it is just like people are, especially on the right, are kind of overstating how much the ratio of violence to just peaceful, relatively non-threatening marches where people just kind of like go in and like go out, hold some signs, go home, kind of like the Women's March. Like that, I feel like that's what these protests mainly are now. And I'm not denying there has been rioting, looting that happening, but I'm saying it's probably, I'd say like 90-10 in favor of peaceful protesting. Like at least if you take the protests over the past like 7 weeks. And what this is probably going to do is just agitate more, which is exactly what his base wouldn't want, right?
If a married guy beats his wife only 10% of the time, do you think he's got a mostly peaceful marriage? I don't know.
No, but so. I think it's like, well, you're having things that are happening. They're not happening anymore, and they haven't been happening for a while, and you're responding to them like 4 or 5 weeks in advance.
They are happening, and they aren't stopping. And
there's not. I don't think there's.
If you're a victim of the violence, it's not just a little bit of violence. It's everything. If your store is looted or burned down or broken into, or one of your family members is shot, we can even talk about crime in general if you want. But if we want to talk just about the protests, there's plenty of criminal activity going on in the protests. And when you talk about unmarked cars disappearing people, we don't know who these people are. We don't know why they're being disappeared. There could be a number of reasons, and some of them pretty good. If you're a professional agitator and you're not making the situation any better for anybody, it's better to get you out of the mix.
But like, let's put it this way: like, if there is information that comes out after the fact that's credible and real, is like undeniable, because I'm not going to be like trusting the national security state to like provide this kind of honest information, especially the Trump administration, but if there is honest evidence that's saying that guy that they just picked up off the street was a outside agitator, I will eat my hat pretty much.
I would love to see who's who and where they end up. But
I think it's very important that we know.
I think we're gonna know. Because nothing happens in a vacuum. Not when there are 200 million cell phone cameras in the world. Nothing happens in a vacuum.
If there is some accountability left,
anything to happen in a vacuum.
Yeah, let's hope so. And it is definitely something that people have not responded well to in the state. The governor called it abuse of power. Ted Wheeler called it an attack on our democracy. And again, it's like, I mean, it's really some pretty crazy stuff. Like, there's now, again, this is a perfect kind of story. It looks like there was a veteran that was involved in the mix, Christopher J. David, he was apparently motivated protests after he saw videos of the unidentified, that's a big thing, unidentified federal agents grabbing protesters off the streets and throwing them in minivans. He felt compelled to act. So he felt the agents' use of violent tactics against protesters without the support of the mayor or the governor or local law enforcement was a violation of the oaths that the agents take to support the Constitution. So he asked, apparently, that, like, who said, kind of just like, he asked a question to them and was apparently, I saw that video. He was hit pretty hard. If that was, I didn't realize who that person was, but I saw that video this morning and it was like quite a scene. We can play, actually, It's just audio. There's no. I don't think there's really any. He kind of just gets hit with like batons and tear gas.
What did he actually say? What was going on all around him? It might not have been the best time to walk up to a besieged federal officer and ask him if he was doing if he believes that he's doing his constitutional duty. I don't know. I think I try to put myself in the position of a police officer every once in a while and think, these are tenuous situations. I don't know who these people are. I'd rather worry about my safety first. And I think we're asking a lot of police officers when we ask them not to do that. They're human beings.
I do agree. I don't think they should be put. I don't think they should be put in these situations, because if you look at, I don't think these protests were going to end up in large scale riots. And I think a lot of the escalation that we've seen has been like, it's not a one-sided, all the protests are doing all the escalation all the time. Like, that's just not, sure, I'm not going to say that like there aren't any like bad people, but you cannot ignore the fact all these videos have been coming out. Not so much anymore, the things have kind of calmed down, but there was a period where you would go online every night and there'd be videos of just cops like hitting and tear gassing seemingly kind of people, unthreatening people.
And there are threatening people also in the crowd. So it's not like if you're a police officer, you're not going to distinguish immediately between who is threatening and who isn't. At that moment, everything is threatening.
Yeah, but what I would say is, all right, just pause there. And now David has seen the video of the encounter and your reaction.
Video without context. Without,
I get like
without what he said is we're looking at nothing.
Still, I don't think like what could he have said that like that kind of reaction is like justified.
What else is happening all around these police officers that's governing their reactions? If there were no violent protesters, there would be no police presence. It's that simple.
And how much? No, I don't necessarily think that's true, because I think these protesters are being primarily brought in as a way too late political show to the people that Trump wants to say, like, he's doing something about this. Like, I think a big part of probably the base that hurt him was, like, the fact that he didn't these protests were happening in the street. And, like, I think they probably blamed him for it in a way. Like, they didn't see him take down on it. Maybe they wanted a tougher hand from him, but I don't think now, so much after the fact, I don't think it really, like, plays well to send these kind of, like, people in at this time.
If it wasn't an election year, none of this would be happening. So,
well, I think the Floyd thing motivated the protest, but I mean, like that was the.
It's also,
I don't think there was motivated by
the Floyd elections. Incident. You couldn't find a single person who doesn't think that that's an atrocity.
Yeah, okay? And that's what was so galvanizing about it.
Everybody was on the same team on that. Where you start to lose people is when you attack officers, when you burn down buildings, when you take over 8 square blocks of a city wherein there are other businesses and citizens who just want to get on with their lives. Mm-hmm. And that's an illegal act.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think the things with the chop and all that stuff, like, but again, a lot of this stuff, 90% of it is just relatively peaceful marches, and I did not hear anything about these particular protests being violent in any reports.
In New York City, the other day, a police officer was clubbed with what looked to me like a 2x4. A young woman reached over a fence. He was at a protest that began as peaceful, wherein non-peaceful people were interjected with weapons to stir up trouble, and
what did he do?
A bunch of cops ended up getting clubbed.
What did he do?
Nothing. He was with one protester and got hit from behind.
And did he not like restrain the person afterwards?
No, the person who was finally found and is now.
Oh, they ran away. Oh, I see.
Clubbed him and ran away.
Oh, okay. I thought like if he would just turn around and chase him after.
With a club brought in by outside agitators. This is what the police are up against.
And again,
in every city.
For all those instances, for probably, I would gander for more of those incidences, I could have a list of things that have happened in just the past few weeks at these protests that the police have come off as the aggregators of a situation.
Like I said,
if
this wasn't a political year, none of this would be happening.
I mean, I think a lot of the troops going in at this time especially